Hello everybody. So this video is more of a pep talk as a long-term holder of MicroStrategy and Bitcoin, way longer holder of Bitcoin than MicroStrategy for me. But at 252, I consider the stock a deal, especially when Saylor tried to articulate today what the earlier buy this week meant. It meant a 1 billion BTC gain. And so I want to talk about MicroStrategy today because it's down, and I realize that it's tough for a lot of folks to see it at 252. But remember, this is a long-term play. Volatility goes both ways. It goes to the upside and to the downside. And the reason why it's down, in my view, is not because MicroStrategy is broken. I don't think MicroStrategy is broken at all. I think just the market is becoming a little more risk-off, especially with the tariffs. And every time the President of the United States speaks, it's a fear on tariff that gets added to the market, and the market becomes risk-off, and Bitcoin is still perceived by traditional finance as a risk-on asset. It's not. I don't think it is. There is a mountain of debt. It makes no sense to me right now that the bonds are being beat up by all sorts of money managers. It makes no sense. But anyways, Bitcoin is still seen by the market as a risk-on asset, and this is the story of being a Bitcoiner, that you see this asset as pristine collateral, not risky, but everybody else sees it as risky. I want to note, though, today the relative strength of MicroStrategy. Today's celebration, because Bitcoin is down actually 83,000, so Bitcoin is down almost 7% today. MicroStrategy at the time of this screenshot was up almost 1%. So Bitcoin is down 5%, MicroStrategy is up 1%. What does that mean? That means that the price to NAV is going back up. One point before I move on, it's important to zoom out. Of course, over the short run, this drop is scary, but when you zoom out, MicroStrategy still has achieved 2 times the performance of Bitcoin over a 4.5-year period. 2x, namely MicroStrategy has returned 93% every year for the past 4.5 years, versus Bitcoin has returned 46% for the past 4.5 years. So MicroStrategy has outperformed Bitcoin 2-to-1. And when you take into consideration that Bitcoin has outperformed the NASDAQ almost 3x the NASDAQ. So you have MicroStrategy, it's the highest performing asset, in the history of assets in the 2020s. That's and of course Saylor talks about that in the presentation. But zoom out. When in doubt, zoom out, as we always say. So like I said, the stock is holding up pretty well right now. 252 for Bitcoin at 83,000. It's holding up pretty well, and I've been following the stock all day. And actually, it's incredibly undervalued, but it got a little less undervalued right now because that's a 1.52 price to NAV, and yesterday I had it at some point at as low as 1.46 price to NAV. Now, I don't know what the direction of an NAV is going to take. We could get into a 1.3 price to NAV. This is not to say that it can't get even more undervalued, but if this is getting into a pretty scary undervalued territory, and I've been adding at these levels. If you follow me on Patreon, I've been adding my daily DCA, not YOLOing into anything, but my daily DCA, I invest a little bit every day, and some of that money went towards MicroStrategy. It wasn't going towards MicroStrategy when MicroStrategy was at 400 or 500. And so I'm happy to add at these levels. There's two things I want to talk about with MicroStrategy. First of all, someone's lack of conviction may be about Bitcoin. So if you got into MicroStrategy, it's important to know that you need to first have a full conviction in Bitcoin, because MicroStrategy, if you look at the price to NAV alone, is actually a little up on the price to NAV alone. The Bitcoin is down. It's Bitcoin that is down. And so you probably, if Bitcoin doesn't help you sleep well at night, if you're worried about Bitcoin trading at 84, then maybe you have too big of an allocation to Bitcoin, or maybe you don't have a big enough conviction in Bitcoin. And I recommend Matthew Crater's video on this Bitcoin bull market over, a very short 10-minute video talking about these these roller coasters on Bitcoin. This is not the first rodeo. This is not the first time Bitcoin goes up and down. Bitcoin down 20% from a peak is really nothing for Bitcoin. And so it's the point number one here is that one needs to check their conviction in Bitcoin, because conviction in Bitcoin is a prerequisite to even loving MicroStrategy. And if you have conviction in Bitcoin, then this is when we need to talk about the price to NAV and the premium over the Bitcoin on the balance sheet, because MicroStrategy's strategy, right, the stock, MSTR, the stock, trades at a premium, and I would argue it's a low premium. It trades at a 50% premium over the Bitcoin net asset value, over the value of the Bitcoin. If you look, the value of the Bitcoin is 42 billion and the stock is trading at about a 64 billion in market cap. But what he tweeted today is the gain. So you're paying 50% over the value of the Bitcoin, but that price you're paying over, you're paying it for a gain. And there was a gain of 1.07 billion last week. And that gain is not taxed, by the way. That gain accretes to the business via the cash flow statement, just like a bank. MicroStrategy is a company that grows by taking in money through its cash flow statement. It doesn't take money for its income statement, a little bit via its main business, but not much. So let's do the math, let's do the calculation, and let's look at how expensive MicroStrategy really is. So Saylor guided for a 15% Bitcoin yield for the year 2025. That would be a 50% gain over the December 2024 Bitcoin stack of 467,000 Bitcoin. So Saylor guided for a BTC gain of 70,000 Bitcoin, and that would be about $6 billion of gain if you use 86,000 as the price of BTC. The current price of market cap, the current market cap of MicroStrategy is 63 billion, and they have 42 billion of Bitcoin. So the current premium over the Bitcoin is 21 billion for MicroStrategy. So 21 billion is the price that you're paying for the stock without the Bitcoin pile. You're paying for that price above the Bitcoin, above the pile of Bitcoin. That's the price that you're paying for the stock. That's the intangible value, if you will. And how much are we paying? So we're paying 21.5 billion. That is the value of the premium, the MicroStrategy premium without the Bitcoin, right? And we're dividing it by the gain. The gain is 6 billion. That's what's been guided. So you're paying a 3.58 times the BTC bag adjusted price, so the price of MicroStrategy without the Bitcoin bag, to the Bitcoin dollar gain. That's a 3.58x. That's the proverbial PE, or the equivalent of a PE that most companies would look at. This is what the guidance is showing us, telling us the PE for MicroStrategy is. It's ridiculously low for a tech stock operating at the heart of a digital revolution, right? Tech stocks tend to trade at 30 PEs, not at 3.5 PEs. It's just a matter of calculation. And what if Saylor does a 60% yield this year? Like sometimes I dream it will do, and sometimes I think it will do when I see how successful it is at raising convertible debt, and how successful it was at introducing the preferreds, right? So what if they did 60% yield? What if they did a 60% yield this year? That would be similar to what they did last year in 2024, so not that far-fetched. That would be a BTC gain of an additional 280,000 Bitcoin, and that would be 24 billion of BTC dollar gain. And the premium, what premium are we paying? We're paying a $21.5 billion premium for a stock over how many Bitcoins they already hold on the balance sheet. So the Bitcoin bag adjusted price to the Bitcoin dollar gain would be a 0.8 9x if they were to actually achieve a 60% Bitcoin yield in 2025 and accrete to the shareholders 280,000 new Bitcoins, which would be worth 24,000 million, so 24 billion US dollars. And so that's absolutely outstanding, if you ask me. This is one of the best opportunities I've ever seen, and I don't think I'm the only one thinking that. Here's another way that I presented it historically, and I haven't presented it in a few videos, so if this is your first time watching this video, this is another way to understand MicroStrategy. So 50% right now, that's the premium we pay over the Bitcoin bag that they already have. So we're paying 50% more expensive than what we would pay for, say, an ETF, or what we would pay if we were to buy the Bitcoin outright, right? When I did the screenshot, it was down to 65%, but it's roughly 66%. So what does that mean? If you were to buy your Bitcoin on Coinbase, you would spend 84,000, and you would get one Bitcoin on Coinbase. And one Bitcoin on Coinbase in year 1 would be the same as one Bitcoin on Coinbase in year 10. If instead of buying your Bitcoin on Coinbase, you were to spend $84,000 on MicroStrategy, you would get 66% of Bitcoin, because 66% of the market cap of MicroStrategy is Bitcoin. So you would get 0.66 Bitcoin. But on top of that, you would get a yield. And in my bear case scenario, you would get a 15% yield for years to come, which means that at the end of year 1, you would be having 0.76 Bitcoin. At the end of year 2, 0.87 Bitcoin. At the end of year 3, you would have 1 Bitcoin. You would need to wait 3 years in order for your amount of Bitcoin to be the same as what you get right away via buying it on Coinbase. And you start being beneficial, you start making money after year 4, where you get 1.15, 1.33, and after 10 years of a 15% Bitcoin yield compounded, you would get 2.67 Bitcoin. Now, what about the base case scenario? My base case is 30% yield for a little while, and then it drops to 20%. Then in that case, it would be what, around month 23 or month 22 is when you would recoup your whole Bitcoin. After a year 2, you would have 1.12 Bitcoin, because on year 0, when you start, you spend 84,000, you get MicroStrategy shares, you get 66% worth of Bitcoin, so 0.66 Bitcoin for spending 84,000. At the end of year 1, if he earns 30%, you would have 0.86 Bitcoin equivalent, and at the end of year 2, you would have 1.12 Bitcoin equivalent. And of course, the numbers get nutty if you assume you can achieve that yield for many years to come, and you would end up with 5 Bitcoins by paying less. And in the bull case scenario, you would end up with even more Bitcoin. In the bull case scenario, if you were actually able to achieve a 60% yield in 2025 on Bitcoin, a 60% yield on Bitcoin, you would get a 1.06. So you would get, right now, I'm buying it at 0.66 Bitcoin. You spend 84,000, you only get 0.66 Bitcoin exposure. But then if he earns a 60% yield, you would get 1.06 Bitcoin at the end of year 1. So in 12 months, you could potentially recoup your investments. It's all about the Bitcoin yield. That's why Saylor makes a big deal about the Bitcoin yield and the Bitcoin dollar gain, and advertises it and keeps talking about it, because this is how the stock works. The stock assumes that you want to accumulate more Bitcoin. That's why conviction in Bitcoin is very, very essential. And then you need to understand how the market works, how accretion works, how a company works, and how money can be made via raising funds via the cash flow statement as opposed to the income statement. And I will conclude this video with this chart, which is the Bitcoin per shares outstanding, or the Bitcoin per shares. And you can see that over the long run, over a 1 year period, the amount of Satoshis per shares just keeps increasing. The amount of Bitcoin just keeps increasing. And this is on MSTRtracker.com. You can go and you can track the Bitcoin per shares going up. And so, of course, you're paying a premium right now. If you buy MicroStrategy, if you put 84,000 in MicroStrategy, you don't get exposure to 1 Bitcoin. You only get exposure to 66% of a Bitcoin. But that 66% of a Bitcoin is going to grow into 70, 75, 80, 85, 90, 110, 120, 150, 200, 300% of a Bitcoin as the years go by. That's why I always say MicroStrategy is a long-term hold for me. This is not a trade. This is not a trade for me. I love this company for the long run. Anyways, days like this prove to you once again that this is not investment advice. This is not financial advice. This is just entertainment, only entertainment. I'm hoping you were entertained. Please like, please subscribe, follow me on Patreon, follow me on X. Thank you for watching and have a wonderful, wonderful day.